Father Michael stared at the bones in the soiled bundle as Buck gazed at him with eyes that seemed to hold all the world's sorrow, and he knew in that instant that old Joachim had carried alone a burden that would forever change the heart of that forgotten town. The morning was hot when the horse appeared in the town square. 3 days had passed since they buried Joachim in a solitary ceremony, witnessed only by the grumpy gravedigger and the priest who mumbled mechanical prayers. Nobody cried. Nobody cared. To Harmony Creek, the old rancher was just another ghost who had finally found rest. But Buck thought differently. The animal trotted down the dusty road with an uncanny, almost human determination. His hooves kicked up clouds of red dust that danced in the air like restless spirits. On his back, tied with leather straps worn by time, he carried a bundle that exuded mystery and a silent urgency. Windows opened one by one as the horse traversed the narrow streets. Mrs. Sebastian, the town's most gossipy seamstress, abandoned her sewing machine to peek through the calico curtain. Mr. Anthony, the baker, emerged from the shop with flour still on his hands, frowning as he recognized the animal. "It's Joachim's horse," he whispered to his wife, who crossed herself 3 times in a row. Buck remained unimpressed by the curious stares. He pressed on like a soldier on a sacred mission. His brown eyes shone with a disturbing intelligence, as if guarding secrets no human tongue could express. He stopped in front of St. Benedict's Church, a humble structure of white stones and a red roof that had withstood time and the Certos gales. The bronze bell still echoed the midday chimes when Buck struck his hooves against the cobblestone ground, producing a rhythmic sound that resembled a desperate Morse code. Father Michael emerged from the cool shadows of the temple, adjusting his black cassock that clung to his thin frame. At 52, his face bore the marks of one who had witnessed many confessions and few miracles. His blue eyes, faded by the relentless sun, met the horse's gaze in a moment of mutual recognition. "What do you want here, boy?" he asked, using the same affectionate tone he used with all God's creatures. Buck whinnied softly, a melancholic sound that echoed through the empty streets of the siesta hour. He tossed his head toward the bundle, as if asking someone to finally pay attention to what he had been carrying for 3 days. The small crowd that gradually formed included the usual curious onlookers, Mrs. Sebastian with her straw fan, Mr. Anthony still smelling of fresh bread, Miss Carmen, the school teacher who had left the municipal school, and Joe the mailman always ready to spread news around town. "Are you gonna open it or not, Father?" Joe teased, adjusting his worn cap. "This fella didn't come here for nothing." Father Michael approached slowly, extending his calloused hand toward the leather straps. Buck remained motionless, like a bronze statue, allowing the priest to carefully untie the bundle he had carried for leagues of dusty road. The fabric wrapping the contents was stained with dirt and something dark that could have been dried blood. When it finally opened, it revealed first a crumpled leather hat. Everyone immediately recognized it as Joachim's, and inside, carefully wrapped, human bones still joined by dried tendons and a rusty crucifix that shone faintly under the midday sun. The crowd recoiled like a wave meeting a rock. Mrs. Sebastian let out a muffled scream, while Mr. Anthony mumbled a forgotten childhood prayer. Miss Carmen, more practical, was the first to recover from the shock. "We need to call the authorities. These are remains." Father Michael held the crucifix with trembling fingers. It was an old piece, the kind grandmothers kept on their bedside tables. The metal was green with verdigris, but the engraved inscription was still visible. "To my beloved son, may faith always guide you, Mother Rosa." "My God," whispered the priest, and for the first time in years, his faith wavered in the face of the mystery he held in his hands. Buck whinnied softly, a sound that seemed like a silent conversation between him and the bones he had carried for so long. His eyes kept turning to the road leading to the dry lands where Joachim had lived his last years, as if waiting for someone to have the courage to follow his tracks to the end of the story. 3 months before that moment, when Joachim was still breathing and Buck still had an owner who whispered secrets in his ear, life in Harmony Creek followed its lazy and predictable course. The old rancher appeared in town only when he needed to buy supplies or exchange a few words with Father Michael, conversations always brief, always laden with ellipses that hung in the air like dust that takes time to settle. Joaquim Pereira dos Santos was 73 years old and had a story that nobody knew completely. He had arrived in the region more than 2 decades ago, bought a piece of dry land on the outskirts of town, with money nobody knew where it came from, and built a simple house where he lived alone, accompanied only by Buck and by ghosts that only he could see. He was a man of few words and many silences. When he spoke, his voice carried the drawn-out accent of the deep Surteau, seasoned with an education that surprised the locals. He could read and write better than many teachers. He recited verses by Patativa Dua Serre by heart, and sometimes he let slip words in Latin that he had learned nobody knew where. If you want to continue following touching stories like this one, revealing the secrets held in the simple hearts of our Surteau, a semi-arid region of northeastern Brazil, characterized by its harsh climate and unique ecosystem, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Stories like this, speaking of redemption and humanity, deserve to be shared and preserved for future generations. But what most intrigued the distant neighbors was his relationship with Buck, the horse, a thoroughbred Arabian, with a chestnut coat that stood out like gold against the parched landscape, obeyed Joaquim without the need for reins or spurs. A gesture, a whisper, was enough, and the animal understood exactly what its owner wanted. It was a partnership that went beyond domestication. It seemed like an ancestral friendship, sealed by pacts only they two understood. On the hottest afternoons, when the sun transformed the Surteau into an open-air oven, Joaquim and Buck would go out for their mysterious walks. They always followed the same direction, north, where the terrain became even more arid, and where footprints were lost among the Mandicaris cactus and twisted Ketinus scrub vegetation. They would return at dusk, always in silence, always with the air of someone who had just fulfilled a sacred duty. Sebastian, who lived in the house closest to Joaquim's property, even then, 3 kilometers away, swore that sometimes she heard the old man talking to himself during the early morning hours. They weren't ramblings of old age, she assured, but long, measured conversations, as if someone were answering from the other side. "He's talking to someone, I swear on my mother's soul," she would tell anyone who would listen at the Wednesday market. "And it's not God, because when we pray, the voice is different. He speaks like someone asking for forgiveness, you know, like someone trying to settle accounts with someone." Father Michael was the only one in town who maintained some kind of intimacy with Joaquim. Not exactly friendship, the old man was averse to close ties, but a relationship of mutual respect based on confessions that were never complete and absolutions that seemed insufficient. Once a month, Joaquim would appear at the church outside of mass hours, always on Wednesdays, always in the late afternoon, when the shadows began to swallow the wooden pews and the silence became almost palpable. He would kneel in the confessional and remain there for hours, sometimes speaking in such a low voice that even Father Michael could not distinguish the words. "Father," he would always say at the end, with that hoarse voice of someone who smoked strong tobacco, "do you think some sins are too great to be forgiven?" "There is no sin greater than divine mercy, my son," the priest would reply, following the catechism learned in the seminary. "What if the sin isn't mine, but I carry it as if it were?" It was always the same question, formulated in slightly different ways, but always carrying the same anguish. Father Michael never knew how to answer adequately. There was something in Joaquim's tone that suggested a pain too deep to be healed with only prayers and penances. The true nature of Joaquim's torment began to be revealed on a September afternoon, when the drought had transformed the Surteau into a desert of stone and thorns. He appeared at the church earlier than usual, with Buck tied up outside, and asked to speak with the priest away from the confessional. "Father Michael," he said, removing his leather hat and crumpling it in his calloused hands. "Do you believe that the dead can ask for justice?" The priest studied the wrinkled face of the rancher, looking for signs of dementia or delirium. He found only a painful lucidity, as if each word cost a piece of his soul. "Divine justice is perfect, Joachim. The dead find peace in the Lord. That's not what I'm talking about." Joachim leaned forward, lowering his voice even more. "What if a man died, and nobody knows where he's buried? What if his family spent years searching, weeping, unable to properly grieve? Do you know someone in that situation?" Joachim remained silent for so long that Father Michael thought he had forgotten the question. Outside, Buck whinnied softly, as if participating in the conversation from a distance. "Father," he finally said, in a voice that seemed to come from far away, 25 years ago, I wasn't the man you know today. I was young, full of anger, and I worked for people who didn't respect other people's lives." Father Michael's heart quickened. After years of incomplete confessions, Joachim finally seemed willing to open the chest of secrets. "Go on, my son." There was a young man, not older than 20, son of a family of small merchants from Petrolina. He had gotten involved with the wrong people, owed gambling debts, those things young men do when they think they're smarter than the world. Joachim paused for a long time, as if each word he was about to say needed to be carefully weighed. "The men I worked for sent me to scare him. Just that, you understand? A scare to teach him not to meddle where he shouldn't. But things went wrong." The old rancher's voice broke. For the first time since Father Michael had known him, he saw tears streaming down his sun-beaten face. The young man got scared, tried to run, tripped over a rock and hit his head. "It was an accident, Father. I swear on my mother's memory that it was an accident, but he died instantly, and I panicked." "What did you do, Joachim?" "I buried the body in the middle of the woods, far from everything. I thought it would be better that way, that the family would forget with time. But they didn't forget, Father. Even today, 25 years later, his mother lights a candle in a church in Petrolina, hoping her son will come home." Father Michael felt the weight of the revelation like a stone in his stomach. For all these years, Joachim had carried alone the burden of an accidental death that had become a mysterious disappearance. "And how do you know his mother is still looking for him?" "Because I go there, Father. Every month Buck and I make the trip to Petrolina. I stay in the distance, watching her light the candles, pray, cry. It's my penance. It's the least I can do." "Why didn't you ever tell the truth?" Joachim sighed deeply, putting his hat back on his head. "Because at the time, the men I worked for told me that if I told anything, they would go after my family too. I was young, Father. I was scared, and then so much time passed that it seemed it would be worse to tell." "How do you explain 25 years of silence? But now you want to tell." "Now I'm old, Father. I feel my time is coming to an end, and I can't die with this pain on my conscience. The boy's mother has a right to know the truth, to bury her son properly, to grieve as she never could." Father Michael was silent, absorbing the magnitude of the confession. Outside, Buck stamped his hooves on the cobblestones, a rhythmic sound that seemed to count the seconds dragging like hours. "Where is the body, Joachim?" "About 9 miles from my house, in a hidden gully between 2 mountain ranges. I marked the spot with stones, in the shape of a cross. Every month I go there, clean the area, say a Hail Mary. It's all I can do for him." "And what do you intend to do now?" Joachim stood up slowly, his knees cracking like dry branches. "I'm going to retrieve the bones, Father. I'll bring them to you, so they can be properly given to the family. I just need a few more days to gather my courage." "Joachim, do you realize that this could have legal consequences?" "Yes, sir, but some things are more important than consequences. Peace of mind is one of them." The old rancher walked towards the church door with slow but firm steps. Before leaving, he turned one last time to the priest. "One thing, Father Michael. If something happens to me before I can do this properly, Buck knows where the boy is buried. He accompanied me every time I went there. If I die before I settle this, trust my horse, he'll know what to do." 2 weeks later, Joachim didn't show up for his monthly confession. Father Michael waited until after 8 o'clock at night, when there was no more natural light entering the church windows. The next day, he sent Joe the mailman to check on the old rancher. Joe returned with the news that the whole town expected, but no one wanted to hear. Joachim had been found dead in his bed, apparently of natural causes. Beside him, on the floor, was Buck, watching over the body like a faithful dog. The funeral was scheduled for the next day. Father Michael prepared a simple but dignified ceremony. He hoped at least some neighbors would show up, even if they didn't like Joachim very much. Respect for the dead was sacred in the Sertão. The Sertão is a semi-arid region of northeastern Brazil, characterized by its harsh climate and sparse vegetation. But no one showed up. Only the grave digger, a grim man who did his job with mechanical efficiency, and the priest himself, who murmured prayers as the earth fell on the simple hardwood coffin. Buck remained at a distance, observing everything with those intelligent eyes that seemed to understand the meaning of each gesture. When it was all over, the horse approached the grave. He sniffed the fresh earth, whinnying softly in a sound that seemed like a farewell. Then, surprisingly, he turned north, towards the dry lands where he had lived with his owner for so many years. Father Michael returned to the church with a heavy heart. Joachim had taken his secret to the grave, and now a family in Petrolina would continue to light candles for a son who would never return home. The justice the old rancher so longed to bring would remain forever incomplete. But Buck had other plans. For 3 days, the horse disappeared completely. Some residents spotted him wandering the roads leading north, always alone, always with that strange determination that characterized all his movements. Mrs. Sebastian swore she had seen him digging the earth somewhere distant, but no one paid much attention to the report. On the 3rd day, Buck reappeared in town, carrying his mysterious bundle. Now, in front of the church, with the bones finally exposed to the sunlight, Father Michael understood the true extent of the animal's loyalty. Joachim had died before fulfilling his last mission, but Buck had decided to complete his owner's work. "My God," the priest whispered, holding the rusty crucifix, "he actually did it." The crowd stirred around, each person offering their theory about the mysterious bones, but Father Michael knew exactly what needed to be done. He looked into Buck's eyes, and saw there an almost human intelligence, a determination that transcended the boundaries between species. "I'll call the authorities," said Miss Carmen, always practical in extraordinary situations. "No," the priest interrupted, with a firmness that surprised everyone. "First, let's find out who this person is. This crucifix has an inscription. It may be the key to identifying the remains." Joe the mailman, who besides being a postman was an incurable curious, approached to examine the piece closely. "To my beloved son, may faith always guide you, Mother Rosa," he read aloud. "It's a common name, but this cross is old. It must be 20-30 years old." 25, Father Michael murmured, but only Buck seemed to hear. The animal whinnied softly, a sound that began to draw the attention of everyone present. It wasn't an ordinary whinny. There was a strange musicality to it, almost as if Buck were trying to communicate in a language humans had forgotten how to understand. "That animal's trying to tell us something," Mr. Anthony observed, scratching his gray beard. "Animals don't talk," Mrs. Sebastian retorted, though her voice betrayed less conviction than her words. "Not with words," Father Michael said, carefully watching Buck's behavior, "but sometimes they communicate in other ways." The horse had positioned himself so that everyone could see him clearly. He then began a kind of ritualistic dance, striking his hooves against the ground in a specific sequence: 3 slow beats, 5 fast ones, 3 slow beats again. He repeated the pattern several times, alternately looking at the bones and the road leading north. He wants someone to go with him. Miss Carmen suddenly understood. He's trying to guide us somewhere. Nowhere, Joe the mailman protested. These are old bones, people. It could be anyone who died years ago. Why are you giving so much credit to what a horse is doing? But Father Michael had already made his decision. Joachim's confession echoed in his memory like an unfinished prayer.